Welcome to the Libertarian Counterpoint. I'm Richard Fields. On the program today we have John Cameron, author of Rewire and Rekill, Development Officer at Pacific Legal Foundation. Also, Kevin Duell, Secretary of the Libertarian Party of California, a law clerk at PLF, and a former Ron Paul supporter in 2008 and 2012, and active with Students for Liberty. Welcome to the show, John. Welcome to the show, Kevin. Thank you. The Libertarian Party National Convention was held last weekend, Memorial Day weekend, and Gary Johnson was nominated for president of the Libertarian Party at the National Convention. He failed on the first ballot. The first ballot was 49 and a fraction %, and you need a majority to win. And on the second ballot, he got 55%, so he was nominated as president. Kevin, did the Libertarians make the right choice between him versus his competitors? The two main ones were John McAfee of computer fame and Austin Peterson, an internet blogger and helper on the Napolitano show.
Yeah, you bet that they made the right choice. This election cycle with a buffoon and a pathological liar being the presumptive nominees for both of the main parties.
I get confused. Oh, you mean both of them are?
Yeah, with both being pathological liars.
Okay. All right.
Now, we have more of an opportunity than ever to make our case to the American people, and credibility is always an uphill battle for us. Having and you haven't mentioned Weld yet, but having two two-term governors.
Let's mention Weld. Bill Weld, William Weld, former governor of the state of Massachusetts, two-termer, got elected by the highest majority re-election margin in I think Massachusetts history, was elected as the vice president. Also went for two ballots. On the first ballot, he got 49% and a fraction, and on the second ballot, he got 50% and a fraction. He only won by a few votes. I was one of those votes, by the way. I think that Bill Weld brings a huge amount of credibility and a huge amount of gravitas and a huge amount of real-world political experience to the ticket, not to mention the fact that he balances the ticket geographically, northeast versus southwest. So let's talk about the Johnson-Weld combination. Why did Gary Johnson want Bill Weld to be his, that was his pick? Why?
Well, two reasons. First one, I mean, these are both former Republican governors, but they were former Republican governors of overwhelmingly Democratic states. So on one hand, it meshes well with the message and how Gary Johnson is presenting himself. But on the other hand, I think Weld is a very good counterbalance to Johnson. Johnson's very informal. He's now taken in his interviews to wearing tennis shoes, not just sometimes, but consistently.
I asked him about that at the convention. I said, Gary, what are you doing wearing these tennis shoes? Because this is the first time I've actually seen his feet. And so I said, what's with the tennis shoes? He said, well, it's kind of a trademark. I mean, I'm running for president. I intend to win the race.
That makes sense. And that should be running shoes then, not tennis shoes.
Well, they are running shoes. We're saying tennis shoes, but they're running. They're not Nikes or something. I'm not sure.
And that's not Weld at all. So I mean, Weld is
Weld
a lot more serious, a lot more composed.
Was the pinstripe suit and the black limousine and leaving the convention.
And I think that's a great fit. I think that makes the ticket a lot more impervious to the type of criticisms that some buffoons, a la Trump, might be trying to levy towards the Libertarian ticket. By having somebody like Weld on board, it's much harder to say that the Libertarians are just pie in the sky or aren't taking it seriously. But with Gary Johnson being involved, I think it adds, likewise, a different kind of credibility in that we are actually being true to ourselves, and we're not necessarily the same kind of politics or the same kind of politician that the other parties are offering.
Yeah, it's interesting. Bill Weld brings the patrician, very much Boston blue blood kind of persona to the ticket. In fact, when he was governor, he was in an interview, he was asked about coming over on the Mayflower, and his answer was, no, we did not come over on the Mayflower. We sent the servants over on the Mayflower to get the cottage ready. And that's the kind of, wry humor that he's able to use. He's very disarming in person. He'll tell a story that, he'll spin a yarn like the best Boston politician. And he's good at it. He's a natural Pole, and he, to his credit, from a libertarian purist standpoint, while he was governor, he appointed as judge an immigrant from South Africa who was the judge on the Massachusetts Supreme Court who wrote the opinion making gay marriage legal. This is back in the 90s, before gay marriage was even on the agenda on a national basis, the first state to go with gay marriage. He was on the record as being the person who favored, at the time, medical marijuana. And he was the person who, when he was appointed to be ambassador to Mexico by President Clinton back in the latter part of the 90s, he couldn't get confirmed. Why couldn't he get confirmed? Because Jesse Helms held up the confirmation, because he was in favor of gay marriage, marijuana, and other nasty things. So this guy brings courage of his convictions and the right convictions.
Yeah, he's been on the right side of issues for a long time.
And he's a hell of a fundraiser. I mean, this is a guy that put a lot of money together. I mean, we have our questions about Romney and some of the other Republicans that he raised money for, but he was good at raising money, and I think he'll be good at raising money here.
I think it is worth mentioning, to explain why there was a little bit of a challenge at the convention in making sure that he was going to be the vice presidential nominee. The reason for that is actually related to why he's so good at fundraising. He's actually not from Massachusetts, he's from New York.
Yeah, Long Island.
And
Long Island.
He explained that he's not friendly, but at least is acquainted with Donald Trump personally. Was not friendly, but acquainted with the Clintons, who also lived in New York.
He worked on the Watergate Committee with Hillary.
So that was part of the challenge, to be able to persuade to the Libertarians, because Libertarians can be a really rowdy bunch. Well,
and purist, and to the purists' credit, they were able to come up, dig up information back in New York. He ran in New York State. He ran for senator, and in New York State, you can run with dual party nominations. You can run as a Republican simultaneously to running as a Libertarian, and he did that, or he started to do that when he did not get the Republican nomination. He dropped out, leaving the Libertarian Party in the lurch as far as having a candidate is concerned, and a lot of Libertarians never forgave him for that. And early in his career, while governor, he signed on to some, gave lip service anyway, to some language which would regulate automatic weapons. And of course that infuriated all of the gun rights activists, as it should. He, at the convention, signed a piece of paper saying that he was wrote it out in longhand and signed it, saying that he was a strong supporter. Even though I've made mistakes in the past, I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. So his heart's in the right place. The contrast is with Gary Johnson. You got the patrician and you got the cowboy. Well, he's not really a cowboy, but Gary Johnson is the guy that started out as a handyman. Right. He started out running a handyman business in New Mexico, built it into a multi-million-dollar contracting company, and when he was disgusted with the way the government in New Mexico was being run, he decided to self-fund a gubernatorial campaign. And he doesn't like to raise. He will tell you, I don't like raising money. I'm not very good at it. And he said, I self-funded my gubernatorial campaign. I did not get any contributions from the public until it was obvious that I was going to win. And then $25,000, $30,000 came in from people who wanted to make nice with him, once he did win. And he governed in New Mexico for 2 terms, again, got elected by a much wider margin in the second term by vetoing more laws than any other governor in the state, in the country, both line item vetoes and total vetoes, and was very proud of that fact and runs on that fact, and was pro-gay, pro-medical marijuana. In fact, he had to resign his position as the CEO of a cannabis company just before he decided to run in 2016.
So, really, this package, I think, gives us the opportunity to do better than we ever have, and significantly better than we ever have, better than the, Ed Clark years, better than ever before.
Yeah, speaking of the Ed Clark years, Ed Clark's running mate, of course, this was back in 1980, was one David Koch.
I've heard that guy.
Yeah, David Koch. And
he's done okay since then. Financially, he's done okay since then.
Well, he was doing okay back then.
Yeah,
in fact, that's why he was
he was even more okay now.
He was nominated back then because he was willing to throw $1 million into the campaign. That's why he got the nomination. For what it's worth. I mean, they had the highest vote percentage of anybody in the Libertarian Party history. Gary Johnson, in his 2012 win, got more votes, but he did not match the Ed Clark percentage of the vote. The other interesting thing about this, all of the back talk at the convention, or the rumor going on at the convention, was that there could be a significant amount of money behind the Libertarian Party campaign this year, which has never ever happened before. In the past, the Libertarian parties had $1 million or $2 to spend, and that was it. Just kind of enough to buy airline tickets to Rotary Club speeches, and that was about the extent of it. Do radio interviews. This time around, you know who Matt Kibbe is?
Yes.
Matt Kibbe, head of FreedomWorks, but not anymore. He's resigned from FreedomWorks because it's a Republican shop, and has started up his own shop, which is a hardcore Libertarian shop. Matt Kibbe was at the convention and gave a speech talking about exactly why he was at the convention. Ron Paul did a cameo. He was given an award, and he did a cameo appearance on screen. So he didn't endorse Johnson, or at least not yet. There's talk that he's going to endorse Trump, God forbid. But he was there in spirit at the Libertarian Party convention. And of course, he was the 1988 Libertarian Party nominee. And the whole upshot of the convention was that there will be. Now, I don't want to discourage anybody from contributing to the Johnson campaign, because obviously a whole lot of small contributions from multiple donors is going to be important for not only the money, but for the image of the campaign as being a campaign of the people. But there is the reality that Matt Kibbe is putting together a super PAC to support the campaign, and there are rumors, unsubstantiated as yet, that there might be some Koch money coming into the campaign in the form of a super PAC.
So, but you were there.
I was there.
And you're pretty good at searching out, sniffing out rumors and facts and all the rest of that. The Koch folks, spokesperson categorically denied a while back.
Well, you have to understand that with super PACs, there can be no communication between the super PAC committee or the super PAC people and the candidate. So it's entirely possible that the Kochs were saying, we will not fund the Johnson campaign, while also being, reserving the right to do a super PAC in support of the campaign. So it's up. Who knows? And the proof will be in the pudding. We'll see.
Well, that's what. Yes, Koch SuperPAC. Now that actually makes sense. But I think we might be sorely underestimating how good this could be for the Libertarian Party. I hate going to Libertarian Party meetings because I don't like herding cats, and I don't like listening to cats fight with each other. Is that why you haven't been in management for the last 30 years? I gave up management in 1989 and never went back. That's, I just don't like going to meetings. I just don't. Management meeting, both start with M. Yeah. And but I decided I'm going to the Libertarian Party National Convention this year because this year is the historic opportunity. I've been supporting Libertarians since 1971 when I was doing a radio talk show, and somebody called me up and said, hey, we would like to come on your show and talk about the Libertarian Party. I said, what's that? Well, let's come on your show and we'll tell you. So I started asking them questions, and I was used to, it was a radio talk show, and I'd ask the local politicians questions all the time. It was mostly a Democratic district, so it was mostly Democrats, Les Aspin, Bob LaFollette, people like that. And I'd ask them questions, and they'd give answers that weren't exactly correct as far as I was concerned. So I asked these Libertarian people questions, and they started asking the questions correctly. And I thought, what the heck is going on here? This is amazing. And I looked into it further and voted for John Hospers back in 1972, and Tony Nathan, who, by the way, is the only person
Tony Nathan, the only Jewish woman who has ever received an electoral vote, the only woman who has ever received an electoral vote, because Roger McBride, a Republican elector from Virginia, said, you know what, I can't vote for Nixon.
Yeah.
I can't do it. Good for him. Then he ended up being the nominee in 1976, and it's been, going forward from there with nobody ever getting more than 1% of the vote.
Well, so what's I think people are throwing around a double digit.
But this time we will. This time, okay, in the polls, Johnson is already, with hardly even being included in the polls.
And this is also before the nomination.
Before the nomination. He's getting 10% to 11%.
Now, how bad's the nomination going to hurt him, though? No. So 10 to 11. Let's step back for a minute and think about the future separated from the past for a second, if you can. Because there's a thing called anchoring in psychology. And if you throw out a number, you can't think of any other number that's far away from it because that number's stuck in your head. That's why there's MSRPs on cars, because you'll never get more than $10,000 away from that sticker price. So instead of thinking about past numbers, let's think about who's out there, how upset the American public is about government, about Congress is low teens in satisfaction. Our current president has made more mistakes than probably any president that's lived through their presidency. The candidates that are out there are Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders. So if you were to just look at that and then look at Gary Johnson and Bill Weld and the state of the nation and not think about the numbers from the past, could you picture President Gary Johnson and Vice President Bill Weld?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing that I told Gary when I had a chance to talk to him, I said, I like the slogan, let's make America sane again. And they're starting to use it. They're starting to use it because they are the adults in the room. Trump is a buffoon, and everybody knows it. Even his supporters know it. The best that he has going for him is that he is a chameleon. He's a Rorschach test that everybody projects their own views on because he'll come out on every side of every issue at some time or another. So, he has no credibility. And Hillary has relatively little credibility. If you take a look, if you take a look at her support,
female candidate who is hated by women.
Well, some women, but
if you take almost all young women, almost
if you
all
take a
women,
look at her support, it is not deep.
To 40.
It is not a deep support. And of course, when you take a look at Bernie, now I've said for the last 6 months that Bernie still has a shot at winning this Democratic convention or
he
nomination.
might win California.
He's the polls right now are Clinton 49%, Sanders 47%. Used to be she had about a 10-point lead. Mm-hmm. He's got a chance of winning California, and if he does, he could get the superdelegates and he could get the nomination. I hope he doesn't, because he's in fact a stronger candidate and probably. Consensus? Is he a more of a challenging candidate for Gary Johnson?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think that if you were to look at the where those votes would come from, mm-hmm. to take that 10% up to 5%, which gives you ballot access in almost every state, or up to 15%, which gets you in the presidential debates through the presidential commission, if you include them in the poll. So beyond that, where do those votes come from? Those votes, I think, if not equally balanced between Republican and Democratic voters, with a lot of disenfranchised Bernie Sanders supporters if Hillary Clinton becomes the nominee, I think actually there'll be more supporters drawn from the Democrats than from the Republicans. And maybe this is coming from living in California, which is, a very blue state, and being, of a younger generation, a lot of my peers tend to lean towards the left. But that's at least the way it looks from this direction.
Well, I think it's going to be roughly split, a draw from Republicans versus Democrats. But here's the thing, and here's what Gary is doing is really smart. He's saying, look, do this test online quiz I side with, and I've done it.
And I filled out, answered all the questions in this long questionnaire, and I sided with Gary Johnson. I can't remember the exact number, something like 87% of the time. I sided with Ted Cruz. Maybe I think he was second in the list, about 60% of the time, because he's right. And Cruz was right on the economic issues. He was out to lunch on foreign policy, but and a lot of other, and the drug wars and all that sort of thing. But on economics, he was pretty libertarian. On all issues, Gary Johnson is. I don't agree with him on the fair tax. I think that's a fool's errand. But you can agree with him. And the other thing that Gary Johnson is doing that's really smart is he said, take that test. I took the test. And of course, I agree with myself all the time. But number two, at 73%, was Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Because I agree with Bernie, or at least what Bernie says, on foreign policy, on the drug war, on civil liberties, on NSA spying, and basically all of the civil liberties and foreign policy issues. Where Bernie is, well, I'll say he's right because what he says is right. I don't trust that he means what he says particularly, but what he says is right. He also is right in identifying one of the big economic problems of our time, which is, he calls it crony capitalism.
Corporate welfare.
I call it, or corporate welfare. I call it crony socialism.
Crony socialism.
He identifies the problem accurately. He's got a terrible solution. He's got a counterproductive solution. And Gary Johnson also identifies that problem, but has the correct solution, which of course is freedom and free markets.
So was Hillary on there?
When I took the test, Hillary got about a 15%.
Oh, from you. But where is this test? Let's talk about this.
isidewith.com. It's on. Just Google iSideWith.
Side with. So
and it has all the current candidates.
Here's the. I'm going to disagree with you guys on a couple of things. I think on the surface it looks like, and you talk about your peers, until recently my normal environs were coffee houses in Midtown. And you would think that these would be dens of socialist iniquity, and they appear to be. But when you get into conversations about people and start talking about, when I mentioned what I was doing for the PLF, a young man who was making coffee for me said, well, you're a freedom fighter. Invariably, anybody that works for a living outside of government employ might now be looking at Bernie because they don't know enough. But if he were to become the candidate, they would learn that what he wants to do is basically put all the money in the pot and divide it up the way he wants to do it, which is already what they feel is happening with the current system. And I think, at least initially, he might pull from Libertarian. But I think when people do a little bit deeper diving on it, that it will actually help Johnson.
Yeah, I question whether people would do that deep of diving. But it's interesting that you bring up his stances on economic issues, which of course are crazy. I mean, it makes him the crazy old man that he is.
The other thing is he wouldn't get away with it.
His wife
might get away with the other stuff with support from
everybody. People have a very poor grasp of economics, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's because they don't teach it.
Well, it's not taught, and people don't take the time to learn it on their own. His wife, Jane Sanders, was the president of Burlington College for a number of years. Well, she's not anymore, and the reason she's not anymore is because
she basically ran it into the ground. She did great fundraising in their eyes, raised about $1 million, had about 100,000. She bought a building for them. They had 200 students. She was going to drive it to 750, but they paid her off with a severance package to get her out of there of about $200,000. And
she borrowed so much money that she drove the college into bankruptcy.
And the Catholic diocese that was ended up holding the loan basically wrote everything off. So she has lived on the public trough basically her whole adult life.
Well, that's fine, but her policy is a template for what Bernie Sanders would do to the country, which is borrow it into bankruptcy. The template for what Bernie Sanders would do exists right now.
It's just south of Panama. It's a country that is the richest country in the world when it comes to petroleum reserves. It has more petroleum reserves than Saudi Arabia does. It also has bread lines and bare supermarket shelves because it has practiced the democratic socialism that Bernie Sanders proposes. And I'm talking about Venezuela under Hugo Chavez and his successor. That is what democratic socialism looks like. It looks like absolute abject poverty in the streets with people, fighting street battles in order to get a scrap of bread. That's what the economic program that's what free stuff for everybody ultimately leads to.
Bad management can overwhelm great resources and good luck, and good management can beat no resources and bad luck. You look at the island of Japan as an example of no resources, hilly terrain, and at one time, pretty good capitalist, although it turned into crony socialism eventually, model of hardworking,
well, you don't have
hardworking, saving people.
Yeah.
You look at
Hong Kong and Singapore for a present-day example.
Nothing other than hardworking people and freedom. You look at another country with wonderful natural resources that was the pride of the African continent, along with South Africa, under capitalism and democracy.
Zimbabwe.
And under Rhodesia.
Yeah.
And when it became Zimbabwe, you at one time had, do you still have your billion Zimbabwe
I am a proud
note?
quadrillionaire. I have my quadrillion Zimbabwean dollars hanging on my refrigerator so that my kids can see what currency
inflation looks like.
Inflation really looks like. Argentina is another example.
Yeah, that, and we had you had a guest on the show who ran for the House, I think, as a Libertarian, and he was in the military in Iraq, and then he was in Argentina.
I'll tell you what, real quickly, let's we have a couple of minutes left. Tell us who we should vote for down ballot in the California primary. We're talking about governor. We're talking about other Republican races.
Well, I mean, to start with U.S. Senate.
I'm not governor, Senate. Yeah.
Right. So actually, I'm a fan of George Yang. He came to the Republican or the Libertarian Party of California convention 2 years ago to speak with us and to build relationships with us. He is a tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, is a Republican. I think he's an interesting candidate.
I would say that if you want to vote the Libertarian ticket, vote Gail Lightfoot. She's been around for a long time. She's the real deal. I would also say that even though in the past I have had good things to say about Ron Unz, no more. He's a nativist, supports the minimum wage. And other than that, vote the Libertarian ticket. It's not going to hurt. Otherwise, it's just going to be a Democrat that wins otherwise anyway, regardless. That's the show. We'll see you again next week, same time, same place on the Libertarian Counterpoint. www.accesssacramento.org, YouTube, and on Channel 17 in Sacramento. Thank you.